Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of key national and international issues. Today we're going to talk about the private FM radio channels and specifically the question of allowing news and current affairs programs on these radio stations. Now, the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, that is TRAI, has sought views on various issues, including whether private FM radio stations should be permitted to broadcast independent news bulletins. Currently, private FM radio operators are allowed to carry the news bulletins of All India Radio in exactly the same format without any alteration. No other news and current affair programs are permitted, but this restriction does not apply on information related to traffic, weather, sporting events, cultural events, career counselling, and public announcements related to civic amenities, etc. Now, industry bodies and players have made representations that FM radio stations must be allowed to broadcast news and current affairs, just as it is allowed on private TV channels and digital platforms, among others. In the United States of America, UK, Canada, and Australia, there is no bar on broadcasting news on radio, but with a strong condition that they have to follow certain guidelines. So today we'll try and understand the why and how behind this, also the pros and cons of allowing or not allowing, and what does the industry say and what does the experts say on this particular issue. Let me first introduce our panelists to you. Beginning with, we have Mr. Rajendra Chugh with us here in the studio. He's the former chief news editor, news reader rather, of All India Radio. Welcome, Mr. Chugh, to Sansad TV studios here as well. I'll also introduce the other two guests before we begin. Mr. Sudhir Gupta is with us. He's former secretary TRAI, and Mr. Nisha Narayanan is also joining us, director and COO of Red FM. Welcome, both of you as well, to Sansad Television. Let me start with the why first, Ms. Narayan, and I'll start with you only because you represent the industry here. The industry seemingly has sort of given a representation to TRAI and the authorities that you should be allowed to carry news and current affairs program. Now, I'll begin with a simple and a small question. Why should you be allowed to do that?
The simple answer, Vishal, is that I think there should be a level playing field for radio. I'm saying when we're allowing news and current affairs on all other mediums, be it digital, be it television, print, everywhere, regional newspapers are talking about news. There are magazines which are allowed news, etc. The internet is booming with news. Then not allowing news on radio, I think, is not a fair thing to do. One should not regulate the medium so much. One needs to have a level playing field. And also, to me, at the larger level, as an industry, I'm saying that radio is only about less than 5% of the overall M&E sector. Now, if the industry needs to boom, we need to kind of give it a lot of fillip, and therefore, one of the other reasons to allow news should also be, from a business perspective, where news should also be allowed. So that's as simple as I can put it for you, okay, as to why news should be allowed on radio, and not just that. I'm just saying that FM. When we talk about FM's present all across the country, and it is local transmission. So when we're talking about local transmission, we're also talking about local news that can be given. So we can customize the news. The local listener wants to know what's happening in his town. Not always a very national or an international perspective. He's more related to what is happening in his own town, in his hometown, etc. Now, those are things that FM can really, really provide. So we're not using FM radio's potential to its fullest. I think by allowing news and current affairs on radio, it'll add to all of that.
Okay. We'll go into the details here as well, but let me first seek views of the other experts here on the panel. Rajendra ji, you've been part of the radio broadcast industry for more than 5 decades now. Been involved with the news broadcast as well to a greater extent. What is your view? Should the private FM radio stations and community radio stations as well be allowed to, broadcast news and current affairs programs on their own rather than, broadcasting exactly the same which is there available on All India Radio?
निशा जी ने अभी कहा कि हमें level playing field चाहिए. To this extent, I am for it. But it should be under a very strict regime of guidelines and supervision. That's my initial statement. Because when we talk of FM channels, we do not talk of only entertainment radios, that is radios like Radio Mirchi, but also community radio, because they also broadcast on FM channels. And both the FM channels, entertainment radio and community radio, both have been demanding the allowance for news and current affair programs from their respective channels. अभी तक की जो व्यवस्था है कि आप ऑल इंडिया रेडियो का न्यूज़ कंटेंट विदाउट टैम्परिंग विद इट आप अपने यहाँ से ब्रॉडकास्ट कर सकते हैं, जो कि बहुत स्टेशंस कर भी रहे हैं, कम्युनिटी लेवल के ऊपर बहुत से स्टेशंस कर रहे हैं, लेकिन मुझे नहीं, मेरे नॉलेज में नहीं है कि कोई एंटरटेनमेंट रेडियो, रेडियो मिर्ची टाइप रेडियो का, ऑल इंडिया रेडियो का न्यूज़ कंटेंट अपने यहाँ से रिले कर रहा होगा. विशाल, दिस इन्वॉल्व्स अ लॉट ऑफ क्वेश्चंस because they need logistics, infrastructure, trained workforce, और सबसे बड़ी बात यह है कि जो आप कंटेंट डिसाइड करेंगे उसको आप नेशनल, इंटरनेशनल, लोकल, रीजनल, और रेडियो के एफएम चैनल्स तो सिटी के लेवल पर हैं, तो सिटी लेवल न्यूज़ में किस तरीके से आप सेग्रीगेट करेंगे, किस तरीके से आप उसको प्रसारित करेंगे, और किस तरीके से आप देहरादून में बैठे, त्रिवेंद्रम में बैठे, सिलीगुड़ी में बैठे या जैसलमेर में बैठे अपने लिसनर तक पहुंच पाएंगे. यहाँ तक ये बात मानने लायक है कि अगर अखबार का पाठक अखबार पढ़ सकता है जी, टीवी का न्यूज़ देखने वाला टीवी पर न्यूज़ देख सकता है, तो वाई शुड अ रेडियो लिसनर शुड बी डिवाइड ऑफ इट. रेडियो लिसनर के पास भी ये फैसिलिटी पहुंचनी चाहिए. इन प्रिंसिपल एवरीबॉडी शुड एग्री टू इट. और अभी ट्राई ने जो फ्लोट किया है पेपर, उसके हिसाब से सबको इसका वेलकम करना चाहिए. लेकिन इट्स नॉट दैट इजी जितना कि हम कह रहे हैं.
Okay. Let me bring in, Mr. Sudhir Gupta here as well, former secretary, TRAI. Mr. Gupta, you heard both the views here. It seems, both sides are agreeing on one part here, that in principle it should be allowed. So the question which I put to you is that not only, whether it should be allowed or it should not be allowed, but if it is allowed, then what kind of guidelines, what kind of, the framework which we are looking at. The argument from the industry is that if it is allowed on private TV channels, if it is allowed on digital media as well, then why not give us the chance also?
No, I agree with both the speakers that presently there is no reason why news channels should not be allowed, or news should not be allowed for private FM broadcasting also. Because when TRAI gave this recommendation way back in 2015, now in last 7-8 years, a lot of changes have happened. And I really don't see any reason why it should not be allowed. But I would still have a caution that it should be only allowed for FM broadcasters, not community radios. Because as far as community radios are concerned, they are not that way regulated as FM private broadcasters are and licensed. And a number of community radios are also probably run by people who are or organizations who are inimical to our national security also. So with this condition, I would agree that they should be allowed.
I'll come back to Ms. Narayan here. Ms. Narayan, seems like there is an overwhelming support here, at least on our panel, for allowing news and current affairs programming on private FM channels. But that sound of caution, can you say something to me, please?
I'm just wanting to add to what Chug and Mr. Gupta said. I'm just saying, in terms of regulation, there is nothing stopping us or the government to kind of put out a regulatory framework, right, or a monitoring unit, like BBC has a Caversham unit. So you can put a monitoring unit which can give strict guidelines of do's and don'ts on news. All right, and every radio player should be following those rules, etc. And any deviation, there could be a very strong penalty. But not allowing news completely, I don't think is an option, because we have to probably allow that. That is one part of it. So what kind of news and to what extent, and what is the kind of freedom, or what is the news guidelines that needs to be done and needs to be followed, is something that can be strictly followed by all the players. One. The other part, in fact, Mr. Chug raised it somewhere in his talk as well. I'm just saying that most of the radio players are owned by big media houses who also have news gathering units. So when they have television channels, they have newspapers, they run digital companies of news, etc. The fourth wing, which is the radio, should also be allowed. So news gathering units, training the teams, etc. All of that is a possibility, as long as there are strict guidelines, and we should be mandated to follow those guidelines. And any deviation, there should be a strong penalty. That's all I would probably want to say. A level playing field is a must. Probably taking news only from say a Prasar Bharati or an All India Radio and having the same RJ of All India Radio being broadcast on all private FM channels is probably not a great thing to do. So we should be allowed to, freedom to deliver news as long as it's within the guidelines. That's the request from the industry.
Okay, you responded to two aspects here, Ms. Narayan. There is a third one also. You're saying that the industry is more than willing to abide by the regulations which will be put in place if at all it is allowed. That's news and current affair programming on private FM channels. Also, second, you're saying that the private FM channels do have the wherewithal to, collect news and disseminate them as well in a proper way. But the third aspect, which Mr. Chugh pointed to, that is what kind of content, you're looking at in terms of current affairs content. What kind of programming do you believe the private FM channels will be able to offer to its listeners?
I think when we're talking about news, we're talking about hardcore, serious news. Now, because the perception of all the private FM channels, because they've always been playing only mostly Bollywood music and independent music, etc., it is not a frivolous medium. Radio is a very powerful medium. It reaches out to tier 2, tier 3 towns, etc. So the moment news is allowed, there could be proper half-an-hour programs or one-hour programs of news broadcast on radio, which would be done by a very separate team of people. So if there is any sort of misconception saying that, the current RJs probably will be reading the news, etc., that is not going to be really the case. I'm saying that very serious journalists and teams will be working on it. So I'm just saying we should not compare the two. So what are we really going to do? We would definitely have, who knows? There could be some channels who may want to be 24/7 news channels instead of only music. Some may have part music, some may have part news. So I think those are choices and business decisions that will be taken. But that's probably part of the business strategy more than anything else.
Okay. Mr. Chugh, does that answer some of your concerns? Because you pointed out as to what will be offered. That's one, and two, whether the industry will be willing to go for or abide by all the regulation and then not term it as
Vishal,
strict.
There are certain basic questions relating to this issue.
Okay.
मैं यहाँ तक सहमत हो सकता हूँ कि गवर्नमेंट इज गोइंग टू गेट रेवेन्यू एज लाइसेंस फी. मैं यहाँ तक सहमत हो सकता हूँ कि दिस फील्ड इफ इट इज ओपन, इट विल ओपन अनदर गेट ऑफ एम्प्लॉयमेंट फॉर द रेडियो जर्नलिस्ट. लेकिन निशा जी के साथ थोड़ा सा मैं इस मामले में विचार करना चाहूँगा. हिज डेफिनेशन ऑफ आरजे इज डिफरेंट फ्रॉम माई डेफिनेशन ऑफ आरजे.
Okay.
She is talking about radio jockeys. I'm talking about radio journalists. See, हमारे कंट्री में किसी भी कॉलेज में, किसी भी यूनिवर्सिटी में, किसी भी इंस्टीट्यूट में ऐसा कोर्स अवेलेबल है ही नहीं जो रेडियो के जर्नलिस्ट पैदा कर सके. क्यों? रेडियो की अपनी एक लैंग्वेज है, रेडियो का अपना एक कंटेंट जनरेशन है. मैं सुधीर जी की इस बात से तो सहमत हो सकता हूं कि कम्युनिटी रेडियो के पास वो सेटअप है ही नहीं.
But Chugh,
निशा जी की
there are premier institutes like Indian Institute of Mass Communication who have diploma courses in radio and television journalism. I'm sure as a radio broadcaster with 5 decades under your belt, you would want it to be refined. But then there are avenues.
I wish कि IIMC जैसी संस्थाएं हमारे देश में एक नहीं एक से ज्यादा होती. My experience with the teaching of radio journalism extends up to almost 10 years.
Okay.
10 साल मुझे रिटायरमेंट के बाद एकेडेमिया में भी काम करने का मौका मुझे मिला है. अनफॉर्चुनेटली बहुत सी यूनिवर्सिटीज जिनके पास अपने स्कूल्स हैं मास कम्युनिकेशन के, उनके पास रेडियो के प्रोफेशनल्स तैयार करने के ना तो लॉजिस्टिक्स हैं ना इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर है.
Okay.
तो आपको एक ऐसी वर्कफोर्स ट्रेन करनी पड़ेगी जो ईट स्लीप एंड ड्रिंक रेडियो न्यूज वाले बंदे हों.
Okay.
इस तरह से बंदे पैदा कर सके.
Okay.
आपके लिए, उनके लिए आपको क्यूरिकुलम तैयार करना पड़ेगा, उनके लिए आपको प्रैक्टिकल्स तैयार करने पड़ेंगे, और फील्ड में उनको भेजने से पहले उनको बहुत अच्छी तरह से कसौटी पर कसना होगा.
Okay, before I go to Sudhir ji, I'll go again back to Miss Narayan here. Miss Narayan, the issue of expertise, bringing in that expert workforce. You're saying that most of these private FM channels are owned by big media houses, but then those big media houses have their print wing, their television wing, or their digital wing. The radio wing, as Mr. Chugh is saying, is still not equipped with the kind of workforce. Where would you get that workforce from?
We will, Vishal. I'm just saying that, what is stopping us from hiring some of the best journalists from newspaper and the television industry into radio? They understand news.
And train them?
We need people who are understanding how news is gathered, how to create, how to gather the news together and put it all together. And I'm saying we have enough experts and enough journalists in this country who can be part of the audio medium and deliver news. So I'm just saying I really don't see that as an issue. I think it's a matter of, when news can be broadcast, it's news after all. Whether it's the same news that is broadcast on digital versus television versus newspaper. So I'm just saying it's a matter of cherry picking what news you want to put out there. But then I'm saying we have some of the best journalists in the country across all mediums. The idea is to put them together and then train them about the power of radio, the power of audio, and the reach that radio brings. And I think those trainings can all be done. I really don't see that as an issue at all.
Okay. Sudhir ji, going back to one aspect here, which Ms. Narayanan pointed out, and both you and Mr. Chugh also referred to, in terms of, the regulatory framework, because the major concern which both of you had, you and Mr. Chugh, was that there has to be a robust regulatory framework in place if this is allowed. And Ms. Narayanan, as an industry representative, is saying that industry is willing to abide by that regulatory framework when it is put in place. So what kind of robust regulatory framework are we looking at? Is there some thought behind that? Is there some preparation on that? Because the other mediums like print, digital, and electronic, that is TV journalism, TV news, do abide by regulatory framework.
So I don't think that you need something different kind of a regulation as far as radio is concerned. Like TV has got a program code as per the Cable TV Regulation Act. Similar kind of a regulation can also be thought of as far as the radio is concerned. But the only my only mandate is that the community radio should not be allowed because they are not that well regulated as the FM private FM radios are.
Okay.
And second point, as what Mr. Chugh was saying, I would say that All India Radio is there since independence, and they have they also had and they have news since that time. So sort of getting personals for private FM, I don't think it should be a big job.
Okay.
So we shouldn't do this only because of the reason that we do not have any curriculum in the institutions or not.
Okay.
That's not an argument for allowing or not allowing news channels for FM broadcast.
Okay. Now,
may
Mr.
I
Chugh.
interrupt here?
Yes, yes,
Nisha
Ji.
I'm just saying the Indian radio is governed by the Indian Telegraph Act, which was formulated in 1885. So we are still ruled by draconian laws today, and I think we need to update it. So because the world, the ecosystem has changed, technology has changed, the way we consume content has changed, the way we consume news has changed. So I'm just saying there is a need to update that. We cannot continuously have the Indian Telegraph Act of 1885. That was when Marconi was only 11 years old, who invented radio. So we are governed by those very old and draconian laws, and that needs to be corrected. And I think and brought up to date, so they'll be more sensitive to the needs of the listener and the consumer.
Indeed, Ms. Narayan, that I'm sure the policymakers would be taking care of. Once the decision is taken to allow or not allow in whichever way it is, then the accordingly changes in laws, changes in the regulatory framework would also be definitely made. But quickly, we're left with a very short span of time. But I'll take one question each from you, Mr. Chugh, and go back to Ms. Narayan as well. That is, when Mr. Narayan was pointing out in terms of what kind of content will be provided to the listeners, to the audience, she was suggesting that the localized news content is something which the listeners would want to, go for. That is one. And two, the radio, that is private FM radio channels, are very well equipped to cater to that need. Do you agree?
आपके इस सवाल के ऊपर मेरा एक इमीडिएट सवाल है, who will define local news and how?
Okay.
Local news और city news will be a new term of interpretation अगर हम private FM channels को news and current affairs में डालते हैं तो.
But in foreign countries like USA, Canada, Australia, there are local, television channels and radio channels as well. They just cater to the local news.
नहीं, of course, उससे एक लोकल न्यूज़ सुनने वाला बंदा तो बेनिफिट होगा, उसको लोकल इन्फॉर्मेशन मिलेगी. लेकिन आज की ग्लोबल विलेज वाली दुनिया में क्या आप सीरिया और तुर्की के भूकंप को अलग रख देंगे लोकल न्यूज़ से? नहीं. देहरादून के किसी गांव में बैठा हुआ आदमी भी ये जानना चाहता है कि सीरिया में या तुर्की में एनडीआरएफ की जो भारत की टीमें गई हैं वो वहां पर क्या काम कर रही हैं, क्या अचीव किया है उन्होंने, कितनी राहत पहुंचाई है उन्होंने वहां पर. सो इस तरीके से आपको इन चीज़ों को डिफाइन करना पड़ेगा कि आप न सिर्फ लोकल लिसनर को लोकल न्यूज़ दे सकें बल्कि नेशनल और रीजनल न्यूज़ भी उसी तरीके से परोस सकें.
Okay, so it has to be a wholesome bouquet. That's what Mr. Chugh is referring to. Final question to you, Ms. Narayanan.
The news bulletin is about.
Okay, indeed. So, final question to you.
एक चीज विशाल मैं यहाँ क्लियर कर देना चाहता हूँ कि रेडियो प्रोग्रामिंग के फॉर्मेट्स की तरह रेडियो न्यूज़ के भी अलग अलग फॉर्मेट्स होते हैं. अभी तक एफएम चैनल्स जो हैं वो रेडियो प्रोग्रामिंग के फॉर्मेट्स को फॉलो करते रहे हैं. अभी न्यूज़ बुलेटिन भी आएंगे, न्यूज़ इंटरव्यूज भी आएंगे, न्यूज़ की डिस्कशंस भी आएंगी और न्यूज़ डॉक्यूमेंट्रीज भी आएंगी.
So current affairs programming is an altogether different genre.
Yes,
that's what you're pointing out. Ms. Narayan, quick response from you on that aspect. Of course, I'm sure if allowed, all private FM radio channels will have their team working on that also. But the industry must have done some sort of, research, analysis or survey over a period of time before, putting that request. Are the listeners that in your audience, are they, willing to go ahead and listen to this kind of content on FM channels? Usually FM channels are considered to be a sort of an entertainment, aspect, listening to music, listening to song, or perhaps, other conversation on various other cultural aspects as well. But listening to news, maybe once in an hour, but you were talking about perhaps, a mix of news and music, or entirely 24/7 news as well.
I think it will be something which will be consumed by listeners for sure. I'm saying that goes without saying. So that's point number one. Point number two, I'm just saying is that Vishal, whenever there is any disaster, what really works is radio channels. Okay, I'm just saying the internet goes down, your mobile networks go down, everything goes down. So your only communication which is open is radio, and we've seen that during cyclones in let's say in the state of Orissa, Andhra, or let's say floods in Mumbai, etc. Whenever there is a disaster, radio has come in very handy. But I'm just saying the common man requires information. He requires knowledge. What is news? I think that definition needs to be clearly defined.
Okay.
The consumption will continue. And I say this as a radio evangelist. I think radio is not just about music. There's a lot more that the content can deliver and the medium can deliver, which is effective. And it will be used by the common man, consumed by the common man. And that is the need of the hour. And the last point is that it reaches to the last mile. It reaches to places where no internet reaches. It reaches to places which are media dark areas. And I think it is important to allow information flow in those areas as well, which is part of our country.
Okay, there it is. Thank you so much, Mr. Narayan, Mr. Sudhir Gupta, and Mr. Rajendra Chugh as well for sharing your views and insight. In fact, it has been a very interesting discussion talking about the pros and cons of allowing news and current affair on private FM radio stations. The views have been sought by TRAI on this from the industry and other stakeholders as well. And as we heard from the experts, there seems to be an overwhelming yes, but with a sort of caution sounded by the experts, putting in place a robust regulatory framework, mechanism in place as well, and some other aspects. We'll have to wait and watch as to what the policymakers decide here and what kind of steps are taken in this issue. And we'll keep you updated on all these aspects and come back again with a different topic also. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.